fund. However, we are running the events for free, and that has just said that it's being recorded. That was the next thing that I was going to say. The event is being recorded and will hopefully be online at a later date. Please make sure you keep your mics off while Jo's doing her presentation. And if you have any questions, you can pop them into the message box at any time, and we'll go through those at the end of each talk. So I'd like to introduce Jo Whitehead of Citycroft Whippets, who is our speaker this evening. Jo's very successful in the show ring, and as a breeder, she's also a judge, a mentor, and a breed speaker for our breed, and has been our breed health coordinator for a very long time. I actually don't know how long it's been, and has pushed our breed health initiatives through in such a good way over the past many years. And a fun fact, she is also very clued up on guinea pig colour genetics as well. So I will hand you over to Jo.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us tonight. So I first did this presentation when we were all holed up in our houses 5 and a bit years ago. The basics of the talk are going to be the same for those that join then, but I'm going to have to go a little bit quicker and move through it because we've got the separate population analysis to go as well. So as Elaine said, if there's questions that come to mind as you come along, as we go along, pop them in the chat and I'll cover it at the end. And also if you've got any particular basically matings that you want to give me over the next few days, I can look at those for you. So Mel's going to do the slides for me. So if we move to the first slide, please. Okay, so just a few really basic bits that then need to get your head round for moving forward. So basically, what's a gene? It's a recipe, it's an instruction book that tells an animal's cells how it is meant to develop. And they control everything, really. And that includes, when we're talking about whippets tonight, their colour and their pigmentation. And a dog's genetic makeup is called its genotype. So you will hear that phrase used. And then this second part is really important to understand when we start looking at what colours we can get from a mating. So an allele, they come in pairs, and each animal or each whippet gets one allele from each parent. And then the alleles join together to form the gene. So we write alleles down as letters, and we'll see that when we go forward. So a capital letter, so a big D, I've written down here on this example, that represents the dominant gene. And then another expression that we need to understand is phenotype, and that's what the animal looks like on the outside. So we could say that the phenotype is fawn, for example. Okay, moving on. So we'll talk about dominant and recessive genes, and colour is reasonably easy in terms of there are dominants, there are recessives. It's not really difficult and complicated. So first of all, you need to remember there are 2 copies, alleles of each gene, and each puppy gets a copy, gets one allele from each parent. They could get 2 alleles that are the same, or each of the alleles might be different. Okay, so if the 2 alleles are different, the dominant one is the one that's expressed in the dog's phenotype, so what it looks like on the outside. Okay, and then the recessive allele, if the 2 are different, that effectively lies there dormant, and it's there, but it's underneath. We can't see it on the outside. But then when that dog goes on to produce puppies itself, its recessive allele is just as likely to get passed on to its puppies as its dominant one. Okay, so moving on, we need to understand for whippets what a dilute is and what a non-dilute is, and you've probably heard or may have heard that term before. So non-dilute is black pigment, and we're going to see pictures as we move through. Okay, so non-dilute is black and dilute is blue or not black. Sometimes it looks like a sort of a murky brown, but we'll look at pictures. So Non-dilute, the black pigment, that's the dominant one, and that's represented by a big D, and dilute is the recessive one and represented by a small d. You can tell a Whippet's pigment as soon as it's born, and we look at their their noses don't have pigment as soon as they're born, but if we look at their eye rims, shading on their muzzle, like the inside of their ears, as they're the sort of places that we can tell their pigment. And also if it's brindle, we can look at the colour of the stripes. So yeah, as soon as our puppies are born, I can see as they're being born, yeah, that's a dilute or that's a non-dilute. Okay, it's a bit of a myth to think that dilutes don't have good pigmentation. Lots of them do, and they don't necessarily look washed out at all, but we'll go and see pictures. So this next one here shows some newborn puppies of ours from a few years ago with the pigmentation. So if you can see the photo on the left, there is the dilute, the blue pigment one is on the left, and then you can see that difference on the puppy on the right, the black on that mask. And then where they're there lay having a drink, you can see the different colours of the stripes. So the two puppies on the right are non-dilute, you can see their stripes are black, but that puppy on the left is a dilute and it has blue stripes. So we could see that straight away as soon as they were born. And then this next slide, thank you, Mel, that's a really good picture of showing a dilute on the left and non-dilute on the right. They've both got the masks, and you can see their ear leather, and you can really see that difference in the colour. So when fawns are born, you can see that immediately there. Okay, so moving on. So just to recap, so 2 alleles relating to pigment, one is inherited from each parent. So these are the combinations you can get. So if a puppy has 2 non-dilute alleles, so 2 big Ds, okay, it's non-dilute and it can only pass on its non-dilute allele to its puppies. It hasn't got anything else to give. So then the second one down is a big D and a little d. So visibly on the outside, its phenotype, it's non-dilute, it's pigment, but then it's got a dilute allele from its other parent, and that's there hidden, the recessive one hidden under the surface. So if mated to the right mate, it would be able to produce dilute puppies. And then if it's got 2 copies of the recessive dilute gene, and it's little d, it's a dilute on the outside. So it looks like a dilute, its phenotype is dilute, and that's all it has to offer its puppies when it goes on to be mated. It can't give anything else because that's all it's got. Okay, next slide. So we've covered the pigment bit initially. So just to recap on that, so you can get a dilute puppy from non-dilute parents if both of them are carriers of the recessive dilute gene. So they would both be 1 copy of big D and a little d as well. You can't always tell on paper whether a non-dilute dog is a carrier of the recessive dilute gene or not. It's not always possible. You can get them colour tested. We have done it with some of ours when I've wanted to know, and it's not been possible to tell on paper. Sometimes it comes in handy. I mean, we've recently had a litter by a black dog. I wanted to know whether he carried dilute beforehand, because if he had, it might have affected the choices of us using him and the possibility of getting blue puppies. So it is something that you can test for. And then it's important to remember that if both the parents that are mated are both dilutes, you can't get anything other than dilute puppies. That's all you would get, because they've got nothing else to add to that recipe. Okay, so there we've done pigmentation, and we need to understand pigmentation to then go and look at the different colours. Okay, so moving on. So we are going to go, I'm going to go in a couple of slides time through the order of dominance, but I'll start with black and blue. Okay, so black and blue. So blue is basically a dilute version of black. And if you just remember that for later, okay? So if you look at that picture, you can clearly see that one on the left is a black and the one on the right-hand side is blue. They came from the same litter. And we know that both of the parents must have been a non-dilute carrying dilute in order to be able to have produced that, to have been able to produce that blue puppy. Okay. When you looked at the pedigree, or when you were told the things, it couldn't be anything other than carrying that gene, or they wouldn't have been able to have it. Okay. There is no way at all of being able to tell on the paper whether that black puppy carries dilute or not. So if both the parents are visibly non-dilute, you would have to colour test that baby to know what she carried or not. Okay, so if you just read that through there, she's definitely has at least one copy of the big D gene, because that's what she is on the outside, and it's a 50-50 chance what her other one is. Okay, so that's the black and blue. And then we're looking at the difference between a non-dilute fawn and a dilute fawn. Now, probably more traditionally, we think of our non-dilute fawns as the reds, or the gingery colours, and you see the black masks and that heavy black eye makeup. You can also get a very pale fawn that is non-dilute. I have got some pictures of that later on, but I think this is probably what a lot of you would think of if I said a non-dilute fawn. So those on the picture there are another pair of litter mates. Okay, so both came from the same parents. Their mother, she was a dilute, so she had nothing to add to that equation other than her two little d alleles. So they were always going to get, it had to be that they got from her. And you would know, even without me telling you, that the dad would have to be non-dilute, because we wouldn't have had that red puppy there. Okay. But we also know he had to carry that dilute gene, or we wouldn't have got the dilute puppy there on the right hand side. So you know that he was a carrier. Okay. So it says there at the bottom, which I've already covered, that the non-dilute pigment on fawn is often accompanied by that rich red coat, but not always. Okay. And I suppose it's also good to understand that we know, well, I have said it already, but that red puppy there, Fred, now a veteran, and well known to probably a lot of you, we know he, without doing any test or before he had any babies, we knew he would be able to produce dilutes, because that's all his mum had given him. That was her contribution. Okay, so that's fawns. And then brindles. Okay, so we see them, and I have got a slide on it, we see them in sort of every shade under the sun, but basically the stripes are either going to be black if it's non-dilute, or they're going to be blue, silvery colour if they're a dilute. And those two there, old dogs of ours, sadly no longer here, but it's a mother and daughter, so you can clearly see the black stripes on Ruby there in the middle, and then Martha, her daughter, is a dilute. So again, without of doing any tests whatsoever, we would know that Ruby carried that dilute gene, because she wouldn't have been able to have Martha if she didn't. Okay. Ruby was one that I spoke about earlier when I said you couldn't tell on paper, because both her parents were non-dilute. They were both black striped brindles, so we didn't know until she had puppies herself that she was a carrier. I couldn't have been able to tell beforehand. And then that's when it is interesting, because just because Ruby carried it, it wouldn't mean necessarily that all her litter mates did, because they could have both inherited the non-dilute version from the parents. Okay, so the only time you can actually be certain that your non-dilute dog is a carrier of the dilute gene as if one of their parents was, or if they've gone on and produced dilute puppies. Okay. And so Martha, who was actually mum of the puppies on the previous slide, we knew as a dilute, that was all that she had to give when she went on to have babies herself. The picture on the next slide, thank you, Mel, that's basically, there was a fawn in that litter as well, but a colour wheel of brindle, really, displaying that point where there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 puppies there that are non-dilute brindle, and their base colour, the underneath part, there it's different on every single one of them when you look at that, but they've all got black stripes. So they're the non-dilutes. And then there at 1 o'clock there was one lonely dilute brindle puppy, and you can clearly see his stripes being that blue colour in comparison. It's quite easy to see in comparison to the brothers and sister there on that picture. When they are born and younger, it's the stripes are obviously more crowded together, but I think it is pretty obvious that you can see what that colour actually is. So yeah, that's recapping for me, really. The parents of that litter were both non-dilute. So visibly on the outside they had the dark pigment, but we know without doing any colour testing they would both be carriers of that recessive dilute gene, because if they weren't, we wouldn't have got that dilute brindle puppy in the litter. Okay, so we now go on to which colour is dominant over the others, and basically a game of Whippet colour top trumps. So we can break it down, and what we've just looked at is there is basically 3 colours in Whippets, or 3 main colours in Whippets. We have got black, brindle and fawn. It's as simple as that, and each one of those has a dilute and a non-dilute version. Okay, so we've got black, brindle, fawn. So just as a puppy inherits one allele for the pigmentation, the dilute and non-dilute from each parent, separately they also inherit an allele from each parent in relation to colour. I'm not going to start bringing in a lettering system for this, it'd be really confusing. All you just need to remember is each parent has 2 colour alleles, and they give one of those randomly to each puppy. So now if we go on to order of dominance to understand what you can get from a mating. So the top trump in the Whippet colour genetics is black. That is dominant over the other 2 colours. Remembering at this point that blue is just a dilute version of black. So black, blue, that's number 1. Then we've got brindle. So brindle is recessive to black but dominant to fawn. And then bottom of the pack is the fawn, which is recessive to both black and brindle. So each parent has 2 colour alleles. Both their colour alleles could be the same. They could have 2 copies of brindle, they could have 2 copies of black, or they could have 2 different ones, but they can't carry all 3. So 2 that are the same, or 1 black, 1 fawn, 1 brindle, 1 fawn, etc. Okay, so continuing on. So we've said that our winner is black. It's dominant to those other 2 colours. And being a dominant gene, that means it can't be carried recessively. It can't be hiding anywhere. And in order to get black or blue puppies, you must have at least 1 parent that is black or blue. Okay, there is a rare exception to this, the cream gene that I will talk about before we end. But for the basic law of colour in Whippets, it doesn't matter somebody saying, oh well, they've got a blue grandma on that side and there was blue farther back, and so we might get blue puppies. No, you won't, unless one of the parents is black or blue. Okay, so after black we have brindle, and then fawn right at the bottom. So in order to get fawn puppies, with it being recessive to both, you know that both parents have to carry it, okay? And what's interesting then about the fawn is you can get that from any combination of matings, as long as both parents are carriers of it. And then because it is recessive to all the others, a very simple one as well is that if you mate a fawn to a fawn, there is only one outcome. There's nothing else coming out other than fawn puppies, okay? So that's because both those parents had nothing else to put into the recipe other than fawn, because that's all they've got. But what I'm going to do now is do whiz through a case study which saw different pigmentation and different colours where everything was possible in one litter. So I've kept the same in from 5 years ago. It may be a while before I get a mating that does the same again. So we're going to look at a case study of a litter between Joey and Sansa, born 5 and a bit years ago. So there's Joey there. He is, his phenotype, so what you see on the outside is a non-dilute brindle, okay? But we knew without testing, we didn't need to do it, that Joey was a carrier of the dilute gene. And that's because his dad is Gus, who's a dilute fawn dog. So Gus had nothing else to give Joey other than his dilute gene. And we also know at that point, because Gus is fawn, he has nothing else to give to this recipe for Joey than a copy of fawn. So there we have Joey, knowing that he his pigmentation is 1 copy of non-dilute, and that's what we see on the outside, a copy of dilute, and then colour wise he's brindle, we can see that on the outside, and then his other allele is fawn. Okay, I think that explains that slide. So if we move on, this was mum of the litter, or still is, my old girl now, Sansa. So you can see what she looks like on the outside. She is black, okay, and we know that black is a non-dilute colour. So Sansa's mum was a blue bitch. We know blue is dilute, so we know that Sansa had to carry a copy of that dilute gene because her mum didn't have anything else to give to her. And we know, because Sansa is black on the outside, that colour wise her mum gave her black, okay, because it had to have come from mum, because her dad was a fawn, okay. So we know what she got from her mum, and then it was quite easy to know what we got from dad as well with this, without having to do any tests whatsoever. So a dad was fawn, so we know he gave no option but to give her his fawn gene, and he was a non-dilute, and we know he had to give Sansa his non-dilute, even though he was a dilute carrier. It's irrelevant here. But because Sansa has expressed that non-dilute on the outside, and we know her mum couldn't have given her that. Okay. So with Sansa, we know she has 1 copy of black and she has 1 copy of fawn. She has 1 copy of non-dilute and 1 copy of dilute. Okay. So what we can use now is Punnett squares, which is something that you can put for all kinds of things that you're looking at, ear length in rabbits, whatever, where it's simple dominant and recessive genes. This is what we use. So when I was having a look beforehand, you could plan it on here, and what we'd do on this one, we are just looking at the colour. And at the top, we have Sansa's options, black and fawn. And then we had Joey's options down the left-hand side, brindle and fawn. And then there, it tells you what the chance of each pup could be. Okay, so looking at that, and remember, this is the colour, the one of the 3 colours, as opposed to whether it's dilute or non-dilute. But statistically, it was a 50% chance that each puppy born would be black. It would be a 25% chance the puppy would be brindle, and it would be a 25% chance that that puppy would be fawn. Okay, so we know all three of the colour possibilities could come from mating Joey and Sansa. Well, I suppose it's important to remind you at this point that that's just what the statistics will say. You know, if you did got 1,000 puppies, it's going to work out pretty much the ratio. But when you're obviously only having the amounts that you have in a litter, it could be, yeah, they could have been born and they were all fawn. It would have been against the odds, but technically it is possible. So then, right, we know each of the three colours is possible. If we go on to the next slide, we can have a look what is possible in terms of the pigmentation. Okay, so we know, we've already talked about it, that both Sansa and Joey have 1 copy dilute, 1 copy non-dilute. So there we are. We put it into the Punnett square, see what it comes up with, and there is a 25% chance of the puppy having 2 copies of the non-dilute gene. So we know that if that happened, that puppy wouldn't be able to produce dilute puppies itself. There's a 50% chance that it's like Sansa and Joey, that it is non-dilute on the outside, but recessively carries the dilute gene. And then there's a 25% chance of it being visibly dilute and having both copies of the dilute gene. Okay, so basically, if we go on to the next slide, it was possible for us to get absolutely everything from that mating: black, blue, dilute fawn, non-dilute fawn, dilute brindle, non-dilute brindle. We didn't get everything pop out. We missed a blue, and I'm just looking at the picture, missed a non-dilute brindle. But there you go. That was a very colourful litter. So odds were, we would have on paper should have got more blacks or blues than that, but we didn't. But yeah, I thought that was quite an interesting one to talk you through, to see the possibilities and to see how it could work out. And that was one that you could work out on paper, so to speak, beforehand. Okay, so just rounding that up about colours and pigmentation on paper. So as I've said, you can't always tell on paper what it will have. I think I've told you all that about it. Yeah, I have. I talked about it when we showed Ruby. Okay, the next slide is a quick talk about party colour and markings. It is extremely complicated. There is a huge range of markings and level of white trim in Whippets. And it's basically the black brindle fawn rule still applies in terms of the, you know, it's a brindle party, a black party, a fawn party, but it's just that it has bits of it that are white as well. So even if your dog just had a fawn ear and the rest of it was white, well, it's genetically got that fawn to pass on, and it's a separate thing altogether, the amount of white that it has. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so it's the white markings themselves are another big equation. An easy rule of thumb is if you mate 2 true parties to each other, you will only get party colour puppies. You can't get solids. And generally, the more white there is becomes more dominant as well. I'm going to now talk about creams, which are really interesting. They are an exception to the rules that we've talked about. Until reasonably recently, they weren't properly understood and were referred to as dilutes, which we now know is wrong. These pictures on here are photos on this page that Rob Wheeler kindly gave me 5 years ago of puppies that he's had in his litters. And now over the years, several times people have sent me litters of newborn puppies and said, oh my God, I've got a white one, and I said, let's see the photo. No, it's not white, it's cream. So when a cream puppy is born, the way that you would know it's cream and not white, if nothing else, is they have no blue or black pigmentation on them at all. So there is none of that shading on the hairs, round the mask, round the edges of their ears. They don't have that at all. So they're born really, really light, most of them. This one on the right hand side there, you can see its blaze on its face, but often they can be born and you don't see any white markings at all, and that they gradually darken in colour as time goes on. So that's what they look like when they're born. And then this next slide, this is a new addition to my pack that Louise has kindly given me. I thought this was really interesting to have a look at, because this cream bitch is actually probably the darkest one that I've been able to see. So you can see those newborn photos there, and she certainly didn't, you wouldn't have thought, oh, she's white when she was born. So it is a much a darker colour. You can see that contrast more clearly. And then seeing her now a few months old, and she's a much, I suppose, if you didn't look at the nose, we'll go on to noses in a minute, you would probably have looked at that and thought, oh, she's a fawn, but she most definitely isn't. She is a cream, and you could tell that as soon as she was born. There is none of the pigmentation around eyes, muzzle, ears, etc. Now, this is why it's really important to know that they're cream when they're born, because this is what confuses people. They look at them when they're older and think, oh, that must be cream. So if we go on to the next slide, I'm going to show you what the difference looks like. So this bitch here on these photos, she's actually grandmother to the young puppy we've got at the moment. So that was her on the left when she was born, and you can see, looks really dark. You can see all that black pigmentation around her muzzle, around her eyes, and her coat itself. I describe, they're not very attractive, those ones when they're first born. They're almost like a grey squirrel, and then they go lighter and lighter and lighter, and by the time well, pretty much by the time they go to their new homes, they're almost like this platinum blonde colour, really, really pale fawn. And this is a non-dilute. We talked about non-dilute fawns normally being red, and in the UK they have been, but we are seeing more of these the really pale ones. But the purpose of this slide is to show you that, yes, some people may have looked at Perry from afar by the time she got in the show ring and said, oh yeah, that's a cream because of the creamy colour coat, but absolutely not. You can see there as a baby that she's a fawn. Okay, so if we go on to the genetic bit about creams, hopefully we won't be too complicated. The cream gene itself is recessive, and this is completely different from the black, brindle and fawn. Okay, so you can describe it as a masking gene, or it might be best to imagine it as like a cloak. So if I'm here with my cardigan on and this is over the top, I have got a different colour clothes on underneath, but you can't see it. Okay, and underneath that cream cloak, the dog will have two, for want of a better word, normal colour genes. So it will have, you know, a black, a brindle, a fawn, 2 copies of each. It will have that as well as the cream. So that's what's really interesting. So I can often would be able to work out what colour the cream is beneath its cloak by looking at its pedigree, but it's not always possible to do so. So with the creams, in addition to their 2 normal colour alleles that they've got, one from each parent, they've also got a cream one, an extra one there as well. Okay, so if 2 cream carriers are mated together, all the possibilities from their normal colours, so you know, if we'd looked at, so if we go back, actually the best way of looking at it, if we refer back to Sansa and Joey, so Sansa and Joey, they don't, incidentally, but both of them could have carried, if they carried cream, we could have got all those colours plus cream as well. Okay, so hopefully that starts to explain that. And in addition to what that we can't see is what their pigmentation is under that coat. So often creams, when you look at them, you can see that lighter nose. On the picture of Louise and Craig's puppy, she had that you know, is a very obvious brown nose. Now I would strongly bet that she is going to be a dilute, but Louise and Craig, you can tell me if you have tested at some point. But you also, on 10 of Rob's creams, have had really, really dark pigmentation that actually, unless you put it right next to a black nose, you could probably mistake it for a fawn, but it isn't. It's a really, really dark chocolate brown. And they are usually, they're genetically a non-dilute. So don't get too hung up on the brown noses. There is some very good in terms of dark pigmentation. But yeah, we've learned a lot more about cream than we did. If you look at the old Whippet colour genetics, it sort of wrongly refers to them as dilute, etc., and they're not, okay, or they're not necessarily. And one, we don't see these very often because there's not that many creams or creams around. But if you make two creams together, because it is recessive to everything, all the puppies would be cream. That is all you would get. Okay, the next bit. Okay, this was a bit of a myth buster. So I had a picture of Gus there. So you will often see claims on selling sites, etc., that a stud dog is producing all colours, produces blue puppies, blah, 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 blah. And throughout Gus's lifetime, he has had black puppies, he's had blue puppies, he's had brindle puppies of both varieties, and he's had fawn puppies of both varieties. But what hopefully you will all know now, that other than fawn, he had nothing else to give to the recipes when he was mated. So the black puppies, the brindle puppies, the blue puppies that have come from Gus's matings, well, they've got that part from their mum. Okay, so yeah, it is funny when you see brindle or fawn stud dogs being advertised as producing blue. Well, it's not them that's given that part. Okay, so yeah, it just explains it there, that other than the dilute fawns that have come from Gus, the mother, the pup's alleles have trumped him every time in terms of the colour and the pigmentation, and he hasn't provided a genetic contribution to those other colours. Okay, but what we do know of every Gus puppy is they will all be carriers of the dilute pigmentation, and they will all be carriers of fawn, because that is what he had to give them. There wasn't anything else. And then if we go to the Merle slide, please. Thank you. So at the time of me writing this 5 and a bit years ago, we had recently had this change to the breed standard, and up to that time it had said that a Whippet could be any colour or combination of colours, and then we added in that last part to say any colour except Merle. Okay, and that is really important. So Merle is a dominant gene. We've learned about dominant and recessive. Merle's dominant. It's represented by the capital M. Now, our non-Merle Whippet, normal Whippet colours, fawn, brindle, black, okay, they are represented by a small m because they're not Merle, okay. And categorically, the Merle gene is not present in Whippets. So every single Whippet is little m, little m. There can't be anything else, okay. And remembering that each puppy takes an allele from each parent. If you were to get a Merle puppy, it has to have a Merle parent, at least one Merle parent. There is no other way of it getting. It can't have been carried for generations. It's just not possible. Okay. So because that big M merle gene is not present in whippets, it's categorically not possible for two whippets to be mated together and produce merle puppies. What you could do is get something that within a small amount of generations was merle coloured and looked very like a whippet, but it would not have started off from two parents that are in the current closed stud book that we have here in the UK. So if there are some merle, going back thinking at the time of us changing the standard and why we did, there were some merle, and I put in inverted commas, whippets registered in Europe. And again, they looked whippety on the outside, but we know that that gene must have been introduced from another breed. Okay, it is not possible to have come from whippets. So that's why it was introduced. And I can't say as I've ever seen one here. Okay, I think I definitely did that quicker than last time. Maybe too quick, I don't know.
Thank you. Is there any questions at the moment? There's currently nothing in the chat box.
I realise obviously we have gone quicker than I did last time, and if you aren't familiar with some of those terms, it might have been a bit of like fried your brain, but it'd be useful if you go back and look at the slides afterwards. I think you'll be able to start piecing it together and hopefully getting that understanding.
Right. There's no questions coming through, so I think we can move on.
Yeah, what I would say is that if anyone wants to send me through via email, or if they've got me on Facebook, any like test matings to say, what can you get from this? I mean, I do get people ask me quite regularly, but I'm more than happy to answer and can put a bit more in of why rather than just what the colours are.
We've got one question just come in. Can you explain the white marks?
I'm presuming you mean the levels of white on a dog. Okay, that if we go, there was a slide on it before creams, I think. Party marking, so it is extremely complicated. So if you were to break down what every level of markings were, there's what's called Irish marked, which tend to have more white on the chest than with a white collar, longer white socks, is all different levels. There is proper solid, which literally might have a tiny white tip on the end of the tail, tiny white toes. We've had a couple of those bitches, and whatever you make them to, you don't get any. You'll get no more white than the mum's got at all. And it is actually, the more white there is, that is more dominant. But I would literally have to have about 10 different photos of it's this one, it's this one, it's this one. But as I said, if you put two true party colours together, you can't get anything other than party colour. You can't get anything other than party babies. Okay, but that proper solid with only the tiny bit of white on a chest and tiny toes, that I found, if it is that true solid, whatever you mate it to, you don't get any level of trim. The collars are interesting, those white collars, and it was first, I think that comes under what's known as Irish marked, and a breeder who'd bred for a long time had said to me they'd never had a white collar at all, and then they'd had a Gus litter that had the white collar, and we see all the time white collars now in the Gus ones, and where it's so the white, there isn't a simple rule that I could sum up really. So sorry, that's not very helpful. I think something else pop up then?
Hang on, I don't. Oh yeah, are there any health considerations in cream matings, like deafness in white cats?
No, not in cream. So any dog that has extreme white on its head, there is that deafness around it, and that white, that is a separate gene as well. That Whitehead. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I've always thought, oh, I hope I don't get a puppy that pops out like that when it's got a solid body and then all its head's white. But when I have seen them, if you look back at the pedigree, you can track it, and there is normally there. So it's this sort of gene that hides. It isn't something I wouldn't want to encourage that because of that link to deafness. But no, cream, you haven't got any associated health issues with it. And then I suppose while we're on that bit, you'll see people mention, oh, you can't mate a blue, and I mean the phenotype of one that looks blue on the outside. You can't mate a blue to a blue because of the alopecia and all those things. Well, it's actually genetically no different to mating two dilute fawns together. So colour dilution, alopecia does exist, but I think it gets a bit of a bad reputation of just saying it's irresponsible to mate blue to blue, because it isn't any different to all that are dilute to dilute matings that are done all the time.
Okay, I think we can move on.
Okay.